Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Still Rose's podcast. This podcast was created for women by women to elevate women's voices. Very excited to have you guys with me. As you know, and for the listeners that have been with us weekly, we've had a really, really great lineup of guests for the spring season. So many really amazing female voices have come through here. So I'm super excited to invite you to get to know my latest guest with me, Jessica. Jessica is amazing. She's on a profound mission to inspire transformation and empowerment with a particular focus on guiding and uplifting women. Her passion lies in assisting individuals to discover their inherent potential through transformative spiritual journeys while transcending the barriers of fear and ego, which, by the way, that part there, the fear and ego, I have so much on that one.
And I coaching session.
Oh my gosh. I have to tell you, I quite often during the guest calls, I'm like, hey, so listen, I'm kind of going through this. I love to open up for the listeners because, again, like, you have this wealth of knowledge here. You're really creating a platform and a place that's safe for women, not just through your work, but also through your podcast. You also have a women's purpose community that you have developed and you're working with. I mean, I can't say enough of how sorely this is needed. So welcome to the show. I'm just so honored to have you here.
Oh, thank you. I'm super happy to be with you today. It's really my honor.
So Jessica, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit more about yourself, and we'll just kind of talk through things. And I'm a bit of a sharer, so you'll hear little bits and stories from me as well as we go.
Well, my podcast is a live coaching podcast. So I don't do interview style. I bring on people that want coaching. So so bring on as much as you want. I'm kind of used to it. Yeah. And I love doing it. But okay, so tell a little about myself. As you mentioned, I only teach about fear now because it was my experience. And whenever I say fear, I'm talking about all forms of fear. And what I'm talking about is the ego, that voice of fear in our mind that presents as the voice of reason. It's the thing that we're all here having an experience with. We're having this deep, profound experience of what we inherently are to come to remember who we are. And so the way that manifested in my life story and my life journey is through things like addiction, through things like a focus on achieving and doing and success, and not listening to what my heart really wanted, and instead doing what I thought I should do. Mm-hmm. So when I went to college and, made the important decisions that so many of us make, it was from a place of survival and scarcity consciousness, in that I never acknowledged what I truly loved. I really went into scarcity mode. What can I be good at to compete in this world? And I anchored and built a whole career to it that I was deeply unhappy in. The whole 20 years of it led to burnout, all these things. And by the time I was 40, I was just like, had enough, and decided to make different choices and different decisions, and really woke up and had the profound knowing and awareness that what was in my heart was meant to be pursued. So my story has been one of soul purpose. It's been one of having the courage to listen and believe the truth in my heart more than the fear in my mind. So from global CMO of a big tech company to living in New York City to having this life that looked great on the outside, to truly stepping away and unraveling it all, to step into what I'm doing today, which, as you mentioned at the start, is, coaching, speaking, authored a book, and created the Women's Purpose Community, which is a spiritual and personal growth community for women in leadership roles.
So it's so much of your story lines up with my story that I'm a really, really big believer in people coming together when they're meant to on the same wavelength. Like if you're in alignment and I'm in alignment, we're going to kind of bump up against each other because we're meant to be in alignment next to each other at some point. And as you were telling your story, I was getting chills because I I've been in my industry for 17 years. It started out as I just graduated from school. I really wanted to go into creative writing, and I didn't, because how am I making money on that? That was all I could think about when I was coming out of school, was how am I going to make money? I have to take care of myself. I have to support myself. Like, what am I going to do? Creative writing. I can't do that. That's a waste of time. Meanwhile, that was like my passion for years, but I just didn't see it as a career, because it, to me, I was like, well, I should be going and beating down that corporate door. I should be traveling for work. I should be trying to climb that ladder. And I was even like a big problem in terms of like workplace toxicity. I tell stories now to people about how I was in my 20s, and they're like shocked, because it is the polar opposite of my energy today. It's a complete, departure from that. And so I've grown up in my industry, and I hit this point in my career about 3 years ago or so, where I was feeling immensely burnt out. I work in marketing and communications, and I got assigned to this particular project. I didn't want to be on this project. I raised my hand, and I don't usually say no to stuff at work, but I raised my hand and was like, I can't do this. I really don't have capacity. But I was ushered into the leadership role for this particular project. And so for 3 weeks over the summer, I worked like 12 to 15 hours a day, like every single day until it was done. And it was causing problems with my husband. Like, I wasn't even seeing my kids. And the listeners have heard me say this before, that I got to the end of the project. It went well. It was great. The whole thing went really well professionally. And I remember I kind of like dusted, it really truly felt like a veil had been like lifted, and I opened my eyes. And at the time, my kids, we had just moved into our house, and my daughters had just turned, I want to say 5, and my son was 6. And I have twin girls who are 5, and I have a little boy who's 6. So you can imagine how crazy it was for me to be working the hours that I was working when I still have all my small kids. And I got to the end of the project, and for the first time in my professional life, I was like, oh my God, like, my kids look bigger. This is terrible. This is not what I want to do. And it was like, literally felt like all of a sudden there was this shift, and it like split off into 2 different paths. And I was like, well, I can continue on this path, but I don't think that this is what I need to be doing. This isn't what I want anymore. And it took me like, I think a year or so to find my way to podcasting, and like to start kind of like branching off into stuff that really felt like it was feeding me, versus something that I felt like was starting to suck life out of me.
I can hear it in your voice.
Yeah. Oh, when I talk about it, it always comes out. It always comes out.
I'll tell you a little story, and then I'll share some thoughts with you. I was recently giving a talk in New York City at a female empowerment conference, and the whole talk is called My Worth Isn't What I Produce. And it was my story, like TEDx style talk. And so I'm rehearsing, as I do, in the hotel room the night before, because I'm not using slides or anything, right? And I have this moment, and it was not planned. I just happened to be staying in this hotel in Midtown because it was close to the conference. And I look out, and I'm like, and there's this point in the talk where I talk about every night working at this ad agency and being there after midnight, and the cleaning staff having come and left again, and I'm still there and living at this. And I look out, and I see my old building. And I worked in this building in 2007. And now here it is, 2024, and I'm giving a talk, and it was such a full circle moment. I was, started crying. It was just unbelievable. And it will feel emotional. And that's a good thing, because that emotion is actually transmuting something within you. So it's like, embrace it, don't resist it, But look, I relate. And this is the journey that we are all doing. For other people, it might be around relationship, or it might be something else. It might not always be the work, but the story is the same. And it's the denial of thyself to come to realize thyself, Yeah. And so we all have that thing, this thing we really want, but the ego says not, but it has all the stories. And your spiritual test and journey, like here in kind of earth school, is that moment where you go, oh, this is the thing that's false. this is true. The universe
Mm-hmm.
doesn't put any dream in my heart that doesn't have a path of potentiality connected to it, because the universe isn't cruel. It's
Yeah.
just up to me. And what I'm trying to learn here is to listen to it, to acknowledge it, and stop denying the truth of who we are. And so you'll always be supported, but it doesn't, I had the same thing. For me, it was, I wanted to go to film school. And it just was like, oh my God, I was always into acting and all these things. And it just, the story in my mind was like, that'll never be possible. Right. And it might
Mm-hmm.
not have looked the way I wanted it to, but there was a path of potentiality there. And in some ways that has manifested, now via, the speaking and everything I do. So I know that your listeners can really, and I just congratulate you for like having the courage. And I know that feeling. Your life is just like, you're like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
What am I doing here in this office? Like trudging through. It's horrible.
And
Yeah.
it's crazy because it felt like not a rug being pulled out, but I can't quite put my thoughts, I can't really articulate it, because the feeling was this whoosh of like, oh my God, I've been pounding down this path without actually thinking through like, well, how is this affecting other things? Or do you really want to be doing this? And to me, it was, that very old, archaic, like, well, you're going to be successful. Like, this is what you have to do. You have to do it this way. When I was growing up, you had to go to college. You had to. There was no other path. You are going to college. And I was like, all right, I'm going to college, which for me, it was fine. Like, I actually really enjoyed school. I was into it. But like for a lot of people, that's not the path. And then we're layering in like, well, you should be doing this. And then we're talking about like, a whole generation, like my parents were born in the 50s. So it's like we have this whole generation of thinking where their mentality is like, well, and then you need to stay at your job. You shouldn't move around. You should be staying at your job for like 20 years. My mom was like very upset with me because I moved agencies every 3.5 years. And she was like, you really shouldn't be doing that. I'm like, no, I kind of have to, Mom, because I'm a woman in an industry where like, I'm not getting promoted. Like, I need to figure this out. I want to talk a little bit about ego and fear. Ego, the reason why that I know both resonate with me, but I'll go with ego first, because I had to, when I was going through this transition into where I am today, which I still have my daytime job, like I still do that, but I have this outlet now through podcasting. So, when I was going through this phase where I was branching into podcasting and into things that were really lighting me up, my ego, I had to, and it's not ego in the same sense of like egocentric. It's like the ego, the inner.
The voice of fear.
So, right. The voice of fear. And I had to almost, not make amends, but I had to sort of just like silence the ego a little bit. And the way that I did it was I tons of meditation. I meditate every single day. Like I'm up early. That's like the first thing I do in the morning. And I had to acknowledge the fact that for almost my whole life, probably my whole life, I very much tried to control everything. And it got even more so, I think in my early 20s or so. And I was really struggling with depression and anxiety, and I had like an eating disorder. And I had this moment of, well, I can't live my life like this. And it was like a Jenny moment where I was like, Jenny, we can't continue on this way. You're not going to have any kind of life if you continue this way. We have to take control of the situation. And in that moment, it saved me from going down a darker path. But then the reality of it is that need to control kind of kept snowballing and snowballing. It made me really great at my job because of what I do for a living, like having to control all the pieces. But then it became like almost too much. And it was like that need to control was not just like, Jenny making sure that she's okay, but it was also like, I have to control everything at work. I couldn't ask anybody for help. God forbid I asked anybody for help. Even when my kids were babies, I was working, again, 10 to 12 hour days. I was up all night with my kids. I was getting them out the door. Like I wasn't, and my family would be like, well, you can ask your husband for help. Like you don't have to do this by yourself. Like you're not a single parent. You have a support system. But there was something in me that was like, no. I have to do it all by myself. And I had to let that go. And that is what I still, to this day, like the last 3 years, 2.5 years, I've been actively working on saying like, I need help. I can't do everything. And like finding some kind of balance there. And I think a lot of women struggle with that control issue and needing to everything to be perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, look, I mean, you mentioned a few things, and one, I will just say, like, it is the paradigm, in many ways, like all the messages you received, everything, I mean, it is broken. That's part of it. One thing that came into me meditation years ago that ended up sparking this whole journey was the truth in your heart is more real than the one you see. So like, don't take your cues from the paradigm. For me, is essentially what that is saying. And to question that. And, if your heart is in conflict with the paradigm or how you can function within it or the different messages and everything, like that's okay. Like your heart is more true. This is, not in the highest service. And I think we are reinventing the paradigm by each of us having our own awakenings and deciding like, we're going to change it within ourselves there. We're going to change the outer. But back like on look, we all have our story, and many of us, to your point, like we are not in our divine feminine energy. So we don't know how to receive. We're thinking that we all have to do it on our own. We're trying to control things. I mean, like fear and control go hand in hand, and we all have our own story and programming of that. What I would say to you or anyone listening, and I'm curious how you've been, working on that and breaking it down. It's like there's two simultaneous paths to healing, and both are important and both can be done in tandem. And on one side, it's like, where did that story come from? And you do got to go back into childhood. You've got to look at the iceberg below the surface and shine a light there, because just shining a light via your awareness unravels a lot of things that feel true, and it could be trauma. It could just be like, our parents grew up in that kind of scarcity mindset too. And our brains were forming then, and we took on all those perceptions. And so just understanding where it come from and how you got here, or what it is you're really afraid of deep down. Yeah. And I will tell you, the deepest fear is always going to come to some variation of this, the universe and me, we're separate. We're not one. And it's like that, again, denial of thyself, and also like viewing the universe as something outside of you, viewing yourself more as the human than the soul, that is always going to be at the lowest root. So understanding and doing that deep level work, that self-exploration, is really paramount. And then the second simultaneous path is exactly what you're talking about. It's act as if. So new behaviors, new neural pathways, you actually heal it from the inside out, and asking for help, like making it a very conscious, intentional practice to experience different by doing different. So I think that's really powerful. But look, I understand it. And we all have the societal story of how we got here, like trying to prove ourselves. And it's from being overpowered and for thousands of years, right? And it's like, now we're trying to compete now. And so then it's like, we probably like a bit, I think, of over-indexed, right? And now we're like coming back into center and into harmony. And men have their own story within that too.
Yeah. You mentioned divine feminine, and I want to touch on that as well, because I don't think that's talked about quite as much. And I actually just interviewed somebody who also focuses like solely on that. Like that was her practice. And I didn't realize like how masculine I was in my energy until I started talking to her. And it was just an interesting, almost like an interesting thing to hear. So for, again, my whole life, I very much protected my emotions, and I used to joke with my cousin who has been on the podcast with me before, that like, oh, I cry in the shower like a winner. And like, that was the joke between the two of us. Like, oh, we don't cry like out in the open. We don't do that. Like, and it started that was one of those things that like only most recently, like you heard me get like a little bit emotional, or when I was talking about my journey earlier. And I have tried to kind of peel that layer back, because for so long I looked at having emotion as weakness, and, having that feminine, power almost as like a disadvantage. and not leaning into it, because I am very aggressive in how I do most things. Like I will, I mean, my husband jokes about it all the time, and he's always like, "Oh, are you going to take over the world again today?" And I'm like, "Probably." And it's part of me is out of joy. Like I love doing certain things. Like I love the podcast work. I like working on the podcast website. Like I love all that stuff. But then on the flip side too, like I'm also working really hard to get comfortable with saying like, I need a little bit of a break, or I need to take a reprieve. When we originally were meant to record, I think I had to message you because we had to reschedule because my kids were sick. We had 2 back-to-back stomach viruses right before, like the week before we were meant to record. I was gearing up to do a product launch. And I actually, it's still happening, but it's just taking its own time. But I was really stressing like every single day, needing to work on this product launch, setting up the funnels, recording the videos, writing the content, and it's all really beautifully well done. But I burnt myself out in throwing myself in. And then my kids got sick. And then I got sick.
Yeah.
And then we cycled through 2 stomach viruses within like a 4-week period. And then like work got a little busier. And one of my podcast colleagues like texted me. She was like, "Hey, like, did you launch it yet? I'm going to promote it." And I was like, "No, not yet." I was like, "Bear with me." And she messaged me. She was like, "Don't beat yourself up. I already know you are." She was like, because it's one of those things where I will get very caught up in feeling like I have to push myself into doing something, or I have to meet this particular deadline. And then it kind of hit me. And I was like, "Jenny, you're making your own deadline here." Like, I know I really wanted to do this and have it ready for, I think it was April, and it just didn't happen that way. And there was a large part of me that was like really angry and upset. But then I also was like, I think I need to take a step back here. So because we had all this sickness in the house and everything, and I was getting really overwhelmed, my solution to try to like settle myself normally would have been to like lean in harder and work harder. But I took the opposite approach this time and was like, maybe I need to lean out. Maybe this is the universe telling me like, "Jenny, this isn't your time for this. Like, lean back a little bit and just take a minute. Like, don't overdo it." So I did that. I didn't record any new podcast episodes. I was just using my guest episodes and kind of pulsing those out. And I took about like 3 weeks, like where I was like stepping back. I'm like, all right, I'm going to hold. I was getting really aggressive. Like, let me just take a few minutes here. And this week I started, reinvigorating myself, and it feels like a reset almost.
Yeah.
And I'm like excited all over again to dive back into everything.
Yeah. I mean, what you're describing again, it's like I go back, look, the paradigm again still is, and thousands of years has been what would call in spiritual world in terms, the masculine energy has dominated. You can call it the patriarchy, you can call it whatever you want. And there are very good and beautiful qualities within the masculine energy. But when it's only that, and there's not the balance of the yin yang, whatever you want to call it, look to nature. Tons of cue. There's seasons. There's time for rest. Flowers aren't always in bloom, right? Mm-hmm. Like I can go on and on with this.
But we've been,
right? It's like we've been in this unhealthy paradigm. And I think I think COVID just revealed how, toxic it is. And everyone was like, "Oh my God, I'm like a robot going through the motions to such a degree, but I'm not a robot. Actually, I'm a human being," and all these things, and just prioritizing doing. It's all up to me, achieving, and like not time for rest, not time for restoration, and all these things that we need as, animals, right? I mean, which we are, let's just be clear, right? So I'm glad that you're having that wake up. And I think so many of us are. And it can be a bit of a scary journey when you're kind of waking up to it and amongst a paradigm that is still in many ways not, and you want to be successful within that. But again, I think if enough of us just choose to prioritize self in the ways that we need it, you talked about feelings. Like I kind of think like as human beings, like we're here to have an experience with these things called feelings, and all of them are sacred. And look at what happens in the world when people don't process their feelings. Like, I mean, you know, I can go on and on about that. So, you know, I think it's a really beautiful thing, but it's a really scary thing. And again, and the idea isn't to totally
Yeah.
over index on the feminine either. It's that we all have these energies within us, and it's to come into balance. Like there's a time for doing, there's a time to rest, right? There's a time to make time and space for what you're feeling. And I think the interesting thing is during this, and I'll call it planetary consciousness shift that we are going through, that is underway in many ways. Like we're seeing more and more folks like you, myself, wake up to this. And the old ways of doing are actually not working anymore. That's the thing. Because like the energy has just shifted. So the trudging and the blunt force that you used to do, you're getting sick. It's like tenfold in. And I think that's the universe's way of like helping us like get back on board and get into balance, you know, in a kind of loving way, though it can be a painful one.
Let's take a quick break.
Are you interested in podcasting but not sure where to start? My name is Jenny Benitez, and I'm here to help guide you through your podcast launch and maintenance. Check out the link in the episode description for Podcasting Unboxed, your comprehensive startup guide. I am very excited to work with you. And it is. And it's almost like, you know, it's almost like if you're not ready for it, you're not going to quite understand it. Cause I know, like I've talked with other people about it. I'm a little careful with like who I share it with. Cause I'm like, I'll share, but you can kind of tell when people really aren't really on board. Yeah. But I know deeply that this is like, I mean, I know men have their struggles. Like we mentioned, like they have their struggles too, but I know deeply that this is something that women really have a hard time with, that whole balance, because every single woman that I know has a story of being overwhelmed, overworked. My cousin had said to me the one time, I'm working to be behind. She already knew. Yeah. She knew she was going to be behind. She was juggling her child, full-time mom, had 2 jobs, I'm like, you know, you don't have to. And I had already kind of started on my journey. And so I would try to like coach her a little bit and be like, listen, like, you know, I have, corporate wise, I've said it here. I've talked about this a little bit. I called the glass ball and rubber ball method, because I had such a hard time, like not trying to do everything, that I discovered this method at one of my jobs. They had sent out a newsletter talking about it. And essentially it's, you know, in a single day, you're going to have like 100 things that need to happen, but you will have some of those things that have to happen that day. Like those are your glass balls. And then the other things that don't necessarily have to happen in that day, those are your rubber balls. They can bounce the next day. So today, after we're recording, after we're done, one of my glass balls that I have to do today is I promised my daughter I was going to read a book with her. That's a priority for me today. I tried to do it yesterday and we couldn't get to it. So I let it bounce over today. So, you know, and I'm using the thing with my daughter as an example here, because it's not just with work, but it's also like personal things and personal tasks and like, you know, things at home and laundry. And, you know, like there's so many other things that kind of pile onto women's shoulders and that we have to deal with, that we're constantly thinking of, that it becomes so overwhelming that it's almost like you don't get anything done. And it feels like you're always behind. And it doesn't necessarily, you're not behind. You've actually accomplished quite a bit, but you always feel behind because you're always thinking, well, I didn't get all 100 things done, so I failed today. And that's really not the case. Yeah. And then look, you know, this conference I was talking to you about that I was at, every woman in there, especially women that are now reaching 40s and 50s, had a story of health challenges, every one of them. And women still are the primary caretakers. Okay. We saw that during COVID, like when 1 million women left the workforce. And the second thing, and it was said at this conference, and I thought it was really brave because it's like, we don't want to admit this, but it's true, but we are physiologically different. Yeah. Oh yeah.
We are, you know, and again, the paradigm is just not shaped for that. It's not, you know, and so it's something to look at. And I think you using your voice, everyone, to create something that actually really works for everyone and is inclusive to everyone is the key. And look, I'm the first to say, and it sounds like, you're in that middle point too. I tried for years to kind of make it work within. And I think I couldn't find the purpose and meaning I wanted from within. And that's why I always say, like, I had to exit the matrix to like make it work for me.
That's how I feel.
And so sometimes you do have to make these tougher choices, but if you're not willing to, and it's not an alignment for you to make these big altering life decisions, it's like, I love the ball analogy. It's like, what are the baby steps you can do?
Mm-hmm.
For a lot of my clients, I would say, like, there's a saying no goal. Like, how many things are you going to say no to this week?
Oh, that's a good one.
Starting to really pause and go, like, do I actually need to do all these things? Where can I get more help and support? Like, if this amount of time is important to me, I want this amount of time with my daughter. Then something does have to change, but like, how can you make those small changes? Yeah.
I used to, my very first foray into the whole alignment thing was, like 16 years ago or 17 years ago. I read that book, The Secret, when it came out.
Yeah.
Let me tell you how much that book changed my life. And it sounds anyone who, if you haven't picked it up, it's a really tiny book, super impactful if you're ready for it. Sometimes it kind of just makes its way to you. I actually used to buy extra copies, and then in conversations with people, if I heard something or if I was so inclined, I'd be like, oh, by the way, I have this book. That sounds nuts, but it helped me so much. It helped me shift the entire course of my life from where it was going to where I really wanted it to go. Helped me meet my husband.
Yeah.
It really, there was a lot of stuff, but there was an important part of that book that really, really helped me in the beginning when I wasn't doing meditating. I wasn't doing meditating back then. And it talked about using your feelings as a barometer for, are you doing things that you actually want to do? Or are you putting yourself in a situation because you feel like you owe it or you're obligated? Because if you're doing that, then you're not feeling joy. And ultimately you're going to feel resentful. And then all of that toxic energy is just in you, kind of circling about. So I used to, at that point, since I was still really new to it, I would, if somebody presented a decision to me or a choice or an opportunity, something to do, I would literally I'd be like, oh, hold on, let me get back to you. And I would take a minute and think through, like, how does this feel? Like, and how does this feel in my chest? Like, does this feel, am I excited about this or do I feel bad about this? And that's how I used to gauge it. And that was really what I used early on. And I think that that's another failing amongst, and failing isn't quite the right word, but I think it's a deficit amongst women where we're almost conditioned to ignore what we're feeling.
When we feel so strongly. Yeah.
Even when we're feeling super strongly about something, like, especially we all know, we've heard the term gaslighting, like that happens constantly. And then we're made to feel crazy sometimes, like, oh, it's your hormones or it's this or it's that or it's that time of the month. Don't get me started down that path. But we're told almost on a regular basis, like, your feelings don't matter. And even if it's like subliminal or it's subconscious messaging that comes through, even if it's not particularly said, but it's an action that somebody takes, we get this, feeling, or get this messaging where we're told, like, your feelings really aren't valid and you can ignore them and just follow the facts. Don't ignore your intuition, follow the facts. And our intuition is there for a reason. Like, we have an intuition because it's meant to help guide us to the right path. And not enough of us are listening to that little voice.
Yeah. Oh my God. So, my total dream is like a world where intuition is valued as much as data. And in fact, I was having this little fantasy or whatever daydream the other day. I was like, God, I'd love to walk into a corporate setting 10 years from now. And you know how it's like, I have a gut feeling, well, let's see if the data validates it. I would love to see that flip. The data says this will let me, I'm sorry, I got to go a step away and see my intuition and my gut. And then that's prioritized as equally important. Like, I was having a daydream about that the other day. But anyway, I digress. One, you're dead on. Again, we are here to have an experience with this paradigm. We've been having an experience to have the experience to wake up out of it. And yes, as part of that, it's been like intuition. You can't trust your intuition. You can't trust it. That's been the suppression of the divine feminine energy that lives within men and women, all of us. It's not just a woman thing. So I love it. And I hear you. And again, it's just one by one. Like my whole business, because I do run a business. I've not had a business plan the whole time. I'm a former CMO. Like all I had was business plans and data. And I've just totally, and I'll use a different word than feeling, I have been honoring the pathways of resonance to manifest this business. And I just live in that energy. I trust my gut. I trust my intuition. And that is how I've been doing and building everything in the last 8 years of this phase of my soul purpose journey. The secret, I mean, so little fun fact. So I was in my 20s when that came out. I was living in LA where I'm living again now. And at that time, always going to Agape. Michael Beckwith is in that, one of the authors of that. And it was phenomenal to see how that Agape changed overnight. So it was like, a very popular thing within LA. But as soon as The Secret came out and then he went on Oprah, it was lines around the block. It was like my whole spiritual Sunday changed like overnight. But it was, such a powerful awakening. And the foundation of that, manifestation, co-creation, it's the foundation. And it's actually a ton of work we do within the women's purpose community, because it's the foundation to step out of surviving into thriving, because it's about you owning your ability to create the life you want and taking a proactive approach to creating what you want rather than reacting to life. If you're just reacting to what life is like offering up to you and settling, you will always be in survival mode because you're not owning your ability to create what you want. So I love that. And I think resonance feeling is truly like everything and such a high truth for us to honor.
Somebody, one of the other ladies that I had interviewed, she had a near-death experience. And, post the interview, we talked for like 45 minutes and she was just telling me a bunch of stuff. But in that conversation, she said, she was like, that changed her life. And she totally, it changed her whole life. And she told me, she was like, I think that we see miracles every single day. But if you're not in tune and you're not in alignment, you're really not going to pick up on these little miracles. And I had shared with her after the fact, it was the day after Christmas. I think it was like the 26th. And I live by the beach. That's like I love it. It's like transformative for me to be by the ocean. And I took my kids. It's called a secret beach. We call it the secret beach. And it's just this like really, you can walk down this path, but if you go off the path, you can find this secret beach basically. And it's a local thing that people will go and hang out there. And so I took my kids, it was December 26th, but it wasn't freezing. And we went to just go explore it and look at it in the wintertime. And Jessica, I don't know what it was in the moment, but I got this feeling, and listeners, you can't see me, but I'm kind of taking my hands and touching my chest. I got this feeling because I looked out at the ocean and it was completely still. Like there were no waves. And I just kind of sat there like, am I, and I like blinked a couple times. I'm like, am I sincerely seeing this? Like, it's the ocean. It's always in movement. Like this can't. And I said to my kids, I was like, guys, are you seeing this? But they're little and they're like, what, mommy? It's, like whatever. And it's crazy because in the moment, like I was in such awe. I didn't even take a picture of it. I was just in such shock. And I messaged the woman that I had interviewed and I was like, this felt like something. And am I crazy? Like, this is what I saw. And she was like, if you felt it, then that was something for you. That was like a sign for you that you were meant to see that day. And I have never seen it since then. Like every time I go to the bay or the ocean, I consistently am like, oh, is it going to be silent today? Like what is going to happen today? And it's never been silent again. But that one day it was totally still and silent. And I really took that to heart as like this is like a sign for me for some reason. And I still, when I think about it, like get like kind of choked up because I'm like, that felt like a purposeful moment for me for some reason.
Yeah, I think, and only you know your own truth. You might want to Google this, but the 0 point? I think the 0 point is where like a stillness of presence. It's what we try to achieve in meditation and all these things. It's like where only God truly lives and exists,
Mhm.
and when you hit that point of transcendence, the 0 point, I mean, like this whole kind of illusionary reality would dissolve around you. And you're just in that like total transcendence of
Yeah.
you being at one with divine, universe, whatever you want to call it. And it feels like you had one of those moments.
I still think about it like months later now, and I'm like that. And so now I make it a point. It's funny, but I plan to make sure I'm being mindful and like in the moment. And I was a constant multitasker before, constantly.
Yeah.
Like if I was out walking, I had my phone and I was on my emails and I was taking calls and or if I was playing with my kids, I wasn't really playing with my kids. I was looking at my Apple Watch and checking text messages, and then I was doing other things, and I have to do this. And I was constantly doing that. And over the past year and a half, I have actively made it a point to be like, I am going to be here and be in this moment. So even I was trying to, I was coaching my stepson because he wants to start meditating, but he's struggling with the idea of just sitting silently. And I was explaining to him about like being in the moment. And I said, I'm like, when you're at work, he works with his hands. And I was like, when you're at work, I was like, you should really like, I know you like to listen to music, but be mindful of like the feeling of the tools in your hand.
Yeah.
Like bring yourself center yourself. And he was like, what are you talking about? I'm like, that's like the easiest step that you can take towards getting towards meditation. Because I think that, when people hear like buzzwords like self-care, meditation, affirmations, like everybody kind of throws them around now. And there are actual proper steps that you take to actually get into the practice of everything. And it's like baby steps, like it's just, like it's to get there. It's not just, all of a sudden you're going to sit down and you're going to manifest $1 million. Like there's some baby steps involved to get you into the alignment so that you can have that, moment, that out of body moment. In the mornings, I had read that meditating right after you wake up, before you really like your mind gets like really activated, is one of the most powerful times, because you're still on that the particular frequency with your brain waves. And my husband started doing it with me. Like I started doing it and I kept telling him, I'm like, you should really try this, because he teaches, and I'm like, you should really get up earlier and just try it with me. And he was like, I do my own thing. I'm fine. And then like slowly he kind of just started doing it with me. And he told me, he was like, he notices a huge difference in his day when he doesn't get to do it versus like when you get to actually take that practice every day and do it. It's life-changing.
It is. It really is. I always say, not that I would have to, but like, I have different morning practices. I do a combination of things, but I always say like, God, if there was one thing I only could pick one thing to do, it would always be meditation. Like that's where I just think everything unfolds. So I love that for you and your husband.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, so during the summertime, I'll meditate out in the backyard, and I'll put the mats down and stuff. I'll actually have my kids come too. And like, I'm trying, because to me, I'm like, I didn't learn any of this until I was 38. I was 38 when I just started like figuring all this out. And I'm like, if I can start teaching them now and like getting them into the habit of doing it. Yeah. Like let's set them up for success. That's a big driving force. Becoming a mother for me was transformative in a totally different way than I had expected, because they were like the driving force for me to almost be better, like be a better person, be the best Jenny that you can be. And even now, like in my day-to-day life, like I actively am making sure, like I want to give them a good example. I don't want them to see a mommy who's burnt out, because we didn't talk too much about burnout, but I mean, I was feeling it. Like, and what started to happen was, because I work from home, there's no like buffer between work stress and then home stress. So I would open the office door, and so actually I wouldn't even open the office door. There'd be coloring on the floor next to me. And there was no moment of like, okay, work Jenny is here, mom Jenny is here. And it was becoming like I was like mean mommy all the time.
Yeah.
And my husband was always telling, he's like, you have to figure a way out to stop. Like you have to figure out a pattern, a place where you can say, all right, I'm disconnecting from work, and take a minute and just sort of reset yourself. Because what had started to happen was I was like bringing my laptop to the kitchen. I'd have like a conference call on the side while I was trying to cook, while I was trying to manage the kids. And then I would be stressed out about something else I had to do, and I would be screaming at everybody. And I'm like, this is not the mom that I want them to remember when they get older, and they would tell me like, Mommy, do you have to work today? And they would get like, my stepdaughter was here the one time, and I had to take a call. I was supposed to be off for the week. I was taking a whole week off, and I ended up taking a call, and my stepdaughter was here visiting. And so I came upstairs to take my phone call. When I came out, she told me, she was like, I can't, I would never be able to do what you're doing. She was like, I wouldn't be able to do that. And I was like, what are you talking about? And she was like, you should have seen their faces. And I was like, oh. Like when they realized that mommy took a work call, they very much were like, but she said she promised she wasn't going to work this week. And I was like, oh God. I was like, my heart. Oh.
Well, look, it looks like you've made some incredible changes. You're imparting those on your kids, and that's all that we can truly ask for, right? It's when you have those awakenings that you act upon them and you do your best and you impart it upon those that you love or, that you're raising in your case. So I love it.
Yeah. No, I've been working really hard at it. Jessica, thank you so much for being on with me. Listeners, I'm going to link to all of Jessica's things in the episode description, including her podcast, because that's awesome that you do like live coaching calls. Like that's really cool. So I'm going to link all that because I think that that's really important for people. I think a lot of people are scared to like put themselves out there. And so this is a really great way for people to like listen in and hear what's going on. And I also am going to link to your book as well, which I purchased, by the way, because I'm super excited.
Oh, you did?
Oh, yes. Oh, I'm a big supporter of all my authors that come on here. I'm very excited.
Well, let me know what you think. Yeah.
I'm super excited about it. I read the description on Amazon and I was like, oh gosh, this is like my life.
There's some secret kind of language in there for sure. Yeah.
I'm super excited to read that. So listeners, you'll definitely have all the links for all of that. And then you'll be able to reach out to Jessica on her platforms as well. So we'll make sure everything's in the episode description. Jessica, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Oh, no, it has been such an honor. I love that you stepped into podcasting because I think you have a real talent for it and you're doing really important work. So it was really my pleasure to be with you today.
Oh, thank you so much. Until next time, everybody, thank you for joining us.